Hi, hello everyone. This is our conscious parenting workshop. Thank you so much for joining us. This is our last one. This is our um, workshop today on intention and consequences. Okay. Thank you all for joining us today. As we kind of start up all of these, welcome to Essentially Parent Therapy. This is a safe space. Your struggles are welcome here. I want to encourage you to be brave and vulnerable. We all have difficult struggles with parenting. And so just letting go of any of that guilt and shame. This is a process, right? Like parenting our children is a process and it's not something we're going to get right 100% of the time. And so just remembering that and being able to own up to our mistakes or things that like we're struggling with so we can begin to move forward or see things that we could do to do better. So with that being said, here are some of the expectations and values I have for my classes. I have a core belief that all parents are doing the best they can with the knowledge and resources they have available to them. So get comfortable with being vulnerable. This is about progress, not perfection, to be the best we can for ourselves and our families and our kiddos. And then we can't do it all. So just pick one thing to work on, one takeaway from today's class to just try to step in the next direction, right? If we just pick one thing and every time we just pick one thing to focus on, then we'll practice that thing over and over and we'll get better at it. And then we'll be able to try the next thing. And that's how we make growth over time. Okay. So quick introduction for those of you who don't know me. My name is Lucy. I have a degree in early childhood education. I was a teacher in the classroom for years and years, taught everything from little 2-year-olds all the way up to 5th grade. So I've had experience with a range of ages. I am a parent educator for Wentzville Parents as Teachers program. And I am also one of the co-chair of the board and a volunteer support coordinator for Postpartum Support International's Missouri chapter. So I do a lot of trainings and trauma-informed support, especially in women and children. I learned about conscious discipline in my own college and teaching background and used it in my classroom for years and years and years. And that's why I'm so passionate about it. I use it with my own children now. I use it in all my relationships now. I really wholeheartedly believe in it and feel like it's such a life-changing way to approach social emotional health and awareness. So a little refresher. If you haven't already, I highly suggest going back and watching our introduction video. It's about 2 hours long. And that kind of goes over this whole thing, but kind of in a little bit more succinct class. And then every workshop that we've done just focuses on one skill and one power from conscious discipline. So it kind of chunks it out. But that intro class is really important to just kind of getting like a basis of understanding of what this social emotional program is about. So conscious discipline is an evidence-based and trauma-informed approach. It's actually recognized by Harvard as one of their top social emotional learning programs around the nation. It's an adult first discipline model, and we're going to talk about this more, but in general, this means that in order to change your child's behavior, we have to change your behavior and how you're interacting with your child first. It's evidence-based and trauma-informed, and it utilizes brain research. So none of this information is actually new information, and it all comes from research that's been done about how the brain works. So I promise this is not like a fad in parenting. This is actually based in actual research about how our brain functions, especially when we are in emotional states, okay? So a little bit of that brain research. Again, this is just a very simplified version of this. We're not focused on this for tonight, but we have 3 states of the brain when we're looking at using conscious discipline with our kids and with anyone, truly, any human. So we have the survival brain, and this is where you're functioning out of your brain stem. This is your fight, flight, freeze response. This is purely like this biological response to keep you safe. Okay. Your brain is asking, am I safe? And if I'm not safe, how am I going to get safe? Okay. Then we have the emotional state of the brain. This is your limbic system. This is where we get a lot of crying and whining and yelling, highly emotional responses, but maybe not as fight or flight, right? It's not that biological, just quick response. And this part of the brain is asking, am I loved or am I connected? Okay. And then we have the executive state. This is our prefrontal cortex or our prefrontal lobe. This is where we're calm, we're cooperative, we can make choices, our children can learn new skills, or we can learn new skills in this part of our brain. Okay. So, in order to move forward with conscious discipline, you have to first understand these brain states and have to be able to identify them in yourself and also where your child is at in their brain state. Okay. So, remembering as we're looking at our workshop topic for tonight, just want you to remember, like, what is your job as the adult in each state? Okay. So when we're talking about intention and consequences as we move forward with tonight, remember that you can't teach a new skill unless your child and you, both of you, have to be in that prefrontal cortex. Okay. Your only job in the brain in the survival state is to provide safety. Okay. Your only job in the limbic system, in that emotional state, is to provide connection and empathy. And then once we get to the prefrontal cortex, then you can teach the new skill. Okay. That's where the actual understanding of consequences is going to take place. It's not going to take place in the brainstem or the emotional state. If you try to put a consequence into place in those, it's not really going to do much. Okay. It's going to be lost on them. All right. So when we talk tonight about the power of intention, I want you to just think about when we are parenting our kiddos, what is our intention in the moment, right? An intention in general, the definition of intention is essentially like the planning or what is our purpose? What are we striving for? What is the goal? Okay, this is our driving force behind our actions, right? So this is what we're trying to obtain. I can see the goal in the distance, and that is my intention. I'm trying to get there, okay? All right, so typically when we're talking about discipline, these are the types of intention that come up in regards to discipline, especially with kids. So there is punitive intention, permissive intention, and then intent to teach. Okay. So we're going to look at all of these. Punitive. So punitive intention essentially is like the eye for the eye, right? Like I made you, you made me feel bad. So now I'm going to make you feel bad. You know, like you caused me pain, I'm going to cause you pain. I'm going to make you suffer. This is like that yucky feeling. It's wanting them to have to pay for their actions, right? Like there's this suffering piece that's involved in punitive intention. Okay. Permissive intention seeks to save. This is trying to shield the child from the consequences of their actions, trying to protect them, or not necessarily child, it could be anyone. But this is where you're trying to shield the person from the harm of possibly like a negative outcome, or maybe even a positive outcome. I don't know. But that's what this permissive intent is. Okay. You're taking on the brunt of it so they don't have to feel it. So here's the problem with that one specifically. I think we can all understand how punitive intention would be like not so great, trying to make someone else suffer. But the problem with trying to protect your children from every yucky feeling is that we're actually cutting them off from true learning when we do this. When we're constantly trying to shield them from the outcome or the consequences of their actions, we're trying to protect them from that feeling of discomfort or upset instead of letting them grow through that. Right? Like sometimes we have to feel the uncomfortableness of our choices to be able to understand how it's going to affect us. So that way we know or maybe change what we do next time. And so we have to shift our brain to stop thinking about like, I want my child to be happy all the time. Like that's lovely. But the reality is like, your child's not going to be happy all the time. Not when they're children and not when they're adults. And so trying to set them up to feel that way constantly is actually doing them a disservice, right? Like they need to be able to understand that there's going to be points in their life where they're not happy. And to be able to understand and take that information in and understand how maybe their choices have reflected that or caused that feeling of unhappiness, to be able to change what they're doing so that way they can reach a point of being happy again, right? So we have to stop trying to shield them from everything as well. Okay. So then we get to the intent to teach. And I think many of us have probably heard before that like discipline literally means to teach. That's literally when you break down, that's the definition of it. Literally, discipline means to teach. And so when we're interacting with our kids, instead of punishing them in that punitive intent or saving them with that permissive intent, that cuts us off from all teaching that's happening, right? And so we want our focus to be on teaching, so that way our children can learn new skills so they can find new and better ways to accomplish the things that they want. Okay? We're guiding them. In the past, if you've watched some of our other videos, we've previously talked about the power of attention. And the power of attention pretty closely correlates with the power of intention, right? So when we've talked about the power of attention, we've talked about how like you want to shine your flashlight on the things that you want to see, right? Focus more on what you want, not what you don't want. So in classrooms, you might hear this as like, use walking feet instead of teachers saying, don't run down the hallway, right? So if you say use walking feet, we've created the mental picture in their mind of walking feet. We're more likely to get that behavior if we're creating that picture in their head. So we're focusing on what we want. And also, we've talked about how instead of putting our attention on trying to stop the behavior after it's happened. For example, I've previously talked about like my own child's difficulty with leaving grandma's house, and how every time I had picked her up from grandma's, that she was in meltdown mode. And I was putting all of my attention on trying to stop the meltdown every single time I picked her up, rather than putting my attention on the problem solving or supporting her through that transition. So that way we had a different situation when I did pick her up. And that's where I used like the social story with her. And we talked about what would happen when we left Grammy's house and when the next time we would come to Grammy's house and what the transition from being picked up to Grammy's house. So I put all my attention on like the positive and like the transition and prepping her, rather than putting my attention on stopping the meltdown afterwards, right? So when we do that, when we focus our attention on what we want, we're also putting our intention on teaching and guiding and problem solving, right? See how those two correlate? Okay. So the power of intention in conscious discipline tells us the big idea here is that mistakes are opportunities to learn, okay? This is the opportunity for our children to learn new skills, and they're going to make mistakes. It's going to happen, right? We all know that. And our goal in this is to teach the new skill rather than punishing them for lacking the skills that we think that they should have. Okay. That's an assumption. Okay. All right. So there's also a piece of this that I think we need to discuss about developmentally appropriate practice, right? Like these are children. And if you think about how long it takes for you to learn a new skill as an adult, let's say you start a new job, you have to learn a new skill, or let's say something like breaks in your house or your home, like the toilet or the dishwasher or whatever, and you have to learn how to fix it. Like you are going to make mistakes. Think about like putting together IKEA furniture, right? Like how many times do you have instances where you put the wrong thing together and you're like, and you gotta like take apart and go back 3 steps because you realized you missed a step or something. Like you're going to make mistakes. And so if we know that as us as adults are going to make mistakes, we have to have so much empathy to understand that this is not something that you can teach a new skill to a child and they're magically going to know how to do it from then on out, right? Like we know it took lots of practice for them to learn how to be potty trained. We know it took lots of practice for them to learn how to ride a bike, or it took lots of times of them tumbling down so they could learn how to walk or to even feed themselves. How many times did they like bring the spoon to their mouth and like drip food all over the place, right? So children are going to make mistakes, and we also have to get into an understanding mindset of being developmentally appropriate about you're not going to teach this skill once, okay? I think we have this misunderstanding that as they get older, we should be able to say like, hey, don't do that. Do this, and they'll just magically start doing it from then on out. And then we get annoyed because we feel like they should have the skill because we've talked about it before. But the reality is they need time to practice these things. Okay. And they need repeated opportunities. All right. So, in order to learn from their mistakes, they also need to experience consequences. Okay. So this is where we're going to go straight into our consequence talk tonight. I think it's really important to talk about what consequences have looked like, could look like, where we want to put our values on them. Okay. However, before we really get into this, I think I always want to put a disclaimer in this conversation. This is usually a harder conversation. And a lot of times there can be a lot of like shame in our parenting when we talk about consequences or how we've chosen to impose consequences possibly with our kids. And I just want you to know that I'm not here to make anyone feel guilty or shameful about what you've chosen to do in the past. I'm assuming you're here because you want to do something different. I don't think you would be sitting in a parenting talk about conscious parenting if you didn't. But the reality is like we've all had times where we've punished our children or implemented consequences that we felt yucky about, right? Like there's moments we're not proud of in our parenting. And we all have them. I have them. I've been doing this for like 10 plus years, and I still have moments where I'm like, ooh, that was rough. That was not your best moment, Lucy. That was rough. Like that felt really yucky for everyone involved. I know it felt yucky for my kid. I know it felt yucky for me. Like, but I just want you to see that when we have these moments, these are opportunities for us to reflect. Okay. About does this feel right? Does this feel in line with our values, with how we're choosing to teach our kids about consequences or their actions? Okay. And so this is just a reflection. We are going to talk about some harder topics in a minute as far as punishments. But I just want you to know that there's no judgment here. We're going to be talking about some hard things. Just reflect. Yeah, just reflect on it. It's going to be all right. Okay. Okay. So there is a misconception in conscious discipline, or often when people hear about like gentle parenting, there's this misconception that it doesn't have consequences, that children are just like totally get to do whatever. There's no consequences involved, and they are just like running the house and they're becoming crazy spoiled and whatever. That is so far from the truth. If you are really doing conscious parenting truly at what it is meant to be and its heart, we want our children to experience consequences. Okay. The thing is that we want the consequences to be related. And that's how they learn. We know that. We know that's how they learn. Punishments are typically not used in conscious discipline. So punishments rely on our judgment over whether a behavior is good or bad, right? I'm deeming that that's a bad behavior and that you need to be punished for it. You made other people feel uncomfortable, so now you need to be uncomfortable, or you caused harm, and so now we're going to cause you harm. That's a punishment, okay? Consequences rely on the child reflecting about their choices, how their choice played into what happened, and then what they have to do differently next time. And I think as we kind of talk about this, it's really important. We're going to watch a video here. It's kind of long. It's like 8 to 9 minutes, I think. And this talks about how the implementation of certain consequences and punishments, not always. Now, disclaimer for this, like, I'm not saying that every child who experiences a punishment in their life, that this is what is going to happen. Okay. But I do think that this creates a really powerful image of how children need to experience consequences, but not punishments, because punishments can ultimately lead to bigger problems down the road. Okay. Even though this video is animated, it does have mention of violence. It does have mention of suicide and gun violence towards the end of it. So just be aware that if you need to step away, give yourself some space. I totally get that. It's weird that a little animated video can have like some really kind of hard concepts in it, but I think it's such an important video that talks about what this looks like. I also think it's important to note, see if you can identify children that you know that maybe fall under what this bully category is, or how that path started, especially in like the toddler years and the preschool years, because it's often what many of us are here kind of going through, and looking at how those behaviors can then be shaped over time under certain circumstances. And the same thing, I think the bully in this situation is often the child that receives more attention, whether good or bad, truly. The wallflower, the victim here, is usually the one that's harder to identify. So I think it's really important to kind of look at both of those and maybe identify children that maybe you work with, or maybe even in your own kid, where they could start to fall into some of these patterns of behavior, and how we want to shift away from how we're interacting with them. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and play this. Give me just a second to get this started.
After the shock of another school shooting, have you ever wondered, how on earth did we not see the signs? How could parents, family members, teachers, and neighbors not have seen a problem in the making? Our best hope of preventing school violence comes from understanding the bully-victim dynamic. Bullying is a relationship issue. Together, let's see how to make a bully from scratch. It takes years to make a bully. In fact, all bullies start out as victims. A child doesn't wake up one day and decide, I think I'll be a bully, any more than a child wakes up and says, I think I'll be a victim. Becoming a bully is a journey of specific life experiences starting at birth. There are road signs along the way that signal intervention is needed. We must know the signs to effectively derail the bully life path. To do this, it's important to distinguish between normal aggression and bullying. Children no longer say, he teased me or she hit me. Instead announce, I was bullied at school. Even a president of the United States, Barack Obama, says he was bullied for having big ears. He probably was indeed teased, but not bullied. Bullying. Let's travel together on a 5-stop journey into the heart of how a bully is made, so we can learn to see the signs. Missing them can be deadly. We will start at the beginning of human life, years before you might have thought. Step into our transporter. First stop, the mother's womb. Let's imagine these children-to-be represent all the kids in the world. Of these children, a handful will experience some form of prenatal stressors and develop a difficult temperament. These little ones are hard to soothe and have trouble sleeping or eating. You love them deeply, but they're a little hard to fall in love with. When you play peekaboo, there are no smiles or giggles. These children turn and squirm away. A parent at this time might feel like, you've been crying since you were born. I tried blowing raspberries and you cried. I tried rocking you and you cried. I can't handle this anymore. Just shut up. This parent is really saying, I love you, but I'm having a hard time falling in love with you. Help. This is so hard. Some of these children with difficult temperaments will have very out of control behaviors. They're defiant toddlers, and later, hard to manage 3-year-olds. Feeling powerless, parents resort to chronic punitive discipline that victimizes their own children. I will count to three. You better work. Two emerging. One is aggressive, defiant, and hot-tempered. The other is passive, acquiescent, and anxious. Let's get back into the transporter. Our next stop is preschool and kindergarten. During this time, our children find themselves in more complex social settings like school. They have trouble playing with others from the lack of basic social skills and the ability to regulate their own behavior. Other children often exclude them, finding them boring or being frightened by their aggression and outbursts. Teachers don't have the skills either and further compound the problem by using their own exclusion strategies. Go to timeout. Go sit in that chair next. These kids are emotionally reactive when things don't go their way. The aggressive child goes from upset to rage in seconds. The passive child gives up just as quickly. Since they cannot self-regulate, they are unable to learn appropriate social skills. The aggressive child hits, grabs, and takes what he wants. The passive child allows others to hit and grab without saying a word. Their chronically stressed brain creates mental distortions in the way they perceive themselves and others. The aggressive child sees hostile intent in others' everyday actions. The passive child believes he should be treated poorly and expects poor treatment from others. Adults tend to see the aggressive child as mean and the passive child as unmotivated or lazy. These judgments blind us to the roadside, allowing the aggressive child to move one step closer to becoming a bully and the passive child in becoming a victim. All aboard. Let's continue on to first and second grade. Things get worse as our children move further into the world of friends. All human beings require a sense of belonging. These children, desperate for connection, are often pushed to the side by classmates, teachers, and schools. They have been excluded from connections with others since birth. This immense social pain actually involves the same pathways in the brain as physical pain in the body. Somewhere during this time, the social pain of rejection becomes so great, the brain undergoes significant changes. For both bullies and victims, the brain compensates for a life of painful disconnection. Buckle in as we continue to see what happens to these children ages 8 through 12. Both our bully and victim are still searching for connection and a place to belong. Since the mainstream tends to exclude them, they move towards one another. The bully says, "You're mine, I own you, now do what I say or else." And the victim provokes or acquiesces because a bad connection seems better than no connection at all. Both our bully and victim are now immune to consequences because they simply don't care. One of the changes their brain has gone through is to shut down the caring system. Adults might threaten with, "You're going to get kicked out of school." Go ahead, kick me out, I don't care. "We are going to call your parents." So what? I don't care. "We're going to take away computer privileges." I don't care. I don't like the computer anyway. "We are going to ground you, spank you, send you to alternative school." Yeah, so what? Since the part of the brain responsible for the motivation to care is literally turned off, there is no punishment or discipline that will help. Rewiring this system can only occur through connections with others. When children say, "I don't care," their brain is unconsciously saying, "I don't feel cared for by anyone, anywhere." Our final stop brings us to the teenage years. Continually trying so hard to belong, the bully may join a gang of tough guys or hook up with some mean girls. They perfect their craft through cyberbullying, spreading rumors, physical action, and day-to-day threats. At this point, the bully is now a dangerous teenager whose brain has changed in two very significant ways. The brain has become programmed to biochemically experience pleasure from hurting others. The bully's internal pharmacy provides him with opioids that act like morphine to deaden the pain of his life journey. The teenager is literally addicted to causing others pain. The brain is immune to rejection and ostracism. This teenager no longer feels a need to belong or care. The skill of empathy is offline. Our victim, on the other hand, lacks the internal pharmacy that a bully has to provide him with relief. The teenager is prone to suffering quietly and then exploding. The pain can become so intense that he may kill himself or others, as we have seen play out in school shootings. Bullying a bully with tough measures and excluding him with no tolerance policies compounds the problem. We are systematically applying the exact treatment that created the bully in the first place, and then expecting it to help. Effective discipline consists of two parts: the slow building of bonds and healthy relationships, and the quick strategies needed in the heat of the moment when conflict occurs. Bully prevention and intervention can only occur in the slow stages of relationship building. Our awareness of the 5 road signs and how a bully is made will save countless lives. Conscious discipline has effective, researched interventions for every road sign along the way. Join us on a journey to a better world. We can walk this road together. Are you?
Okay. Whew. Kind of a heavy video, but thank you so much for kind of taking the time to listen to that. I think again, this is not going to be every child. I'm not saying every single one of your kids that if we choose to punish them in some way is going to be this kid. That's not at all my point. But you can see how certain punishments or certain consequences that are enforced with children can set up a pathway that make it easier for children to get stuck on this route, right? And so we have to be careful about how are we choosing to implement consequences with our kids, so that way we're making sure that we're actually giving them the skills to be able to handle their own mental health and also to engage socially with others in an acceptable way, right? Okay. So that traditional method or traditional model of discipline teaches punishment, right? It teaches us that we need to control our kids, and we gain control through punishing them. This is the traditional model, right? If we shame them, punish them, make them feel yucky, then they don't like feeling that way and they won't do it again. They'll be fearful of us. They'll respect us. And that's how we make sure that they are acting right, right? The problem with punishments is that they're often unrelated to the behavior. So for example, I feel like a common one is if you don't sit down at the table or if you don't stop hitting your sister, you're not going to get any iPad time later, right? What does the iPad have anything to do with hitting someone? I just those things they're not in line with each other. They don't have anything to do with each other. Punishments often also focus on getting even. So it's oh, you broke your brother's toy, so he gets to break your toy now, right? So we're gonna let you get even. It's this, you caused me pain and discomfort, and so I'm gonna make sure you feel that same pain and discomfort that I had to feel. Okay. The problem with this is that misbehavior in children actually is revealing that they have a missing skill. They haven't been taught a better way to deal with something. And so punishing them is not going to change that behavior. You haven't taught them to the new behavior to replace it, right? So you may not see it in the moment, or you may have stopped behavior right in that second, but because you haven't taught a new skill, that they're going to engage in that behavior again because we haven't given them something new for their toolbox. Okay. And it doesn't work long term. Punishment, there's so much research out there that shows that like punishment does not work long term because it pits them against you instead of them against their own choice. When you are the one enforcing a punishment, when you are implementing a punishment that is not related, they know that, and they know that it's you not letting them have the iPad time. They know it's you not letting them to go hang out with their friends. They know it's you, like you're the person enforcing it. And so instead of them learning from their mistake, what you've actually just done is you've actually just made them mad at you. Okay. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we kind of move forward here. But some of the kind of common punishments we see are spanking and timeout. Those are still very prevalent in our culture. And the unrelated or imposed consequences. Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about these. So spanking is still legal in the state of Missouri. But we have all this amazing research now on spanking and what it does to the brain. So if we look at the basis of it, when we talk about that brain system, when we cause pain to a child, when we hit them or spank them, you are essentially putting them in that fight or flight response, right? Their brain is saying, you're not safe. I'm not safe. I'm being harmed physically. I'm being harmed. And so we have put them straight into that brainstem. Now we know it's going to take way longer to one, get them out of that brainstem, and that they can't learn a new skill when they're in the brainstem. They have to be in that frontal cortex to learn the new skill. So this is working against you. The other part of this is that we also have research that shows now that physical aggression actually leads to more physical aggression. So using physical aggression leads to more physical aggression. And that there's research now that actually shows that spanking elicits a similar response in a child's brain to sexual abuse. You see the same parts of the brain light up in these children that have experienced spanking and sexual abuse or trauma. And we know that children whose families use corporal punishment are more likely to develop mental health issues, mental health problems. So behavior, depression, codependencies, right? And unfortunately, many people don't think of spanking as a form of violence, but it is. And there's actually only 62 countries, not including the United States, that have banned corporal punishment, especially with children. So, 1/3 of parents in the United States report spanking their children every week. So it's still a very common thing in our culture. If you're interested about reading the actual effects, let's see if I can pull up this link. So, it's like down in this little link and I can't get to it. Let me see here, because I think this is an important thing to bring up. So we'll go to this screen for a second and I can, I think, pull it up from here. So this is the article that you can actually reference, or one of the articles about this research. So corporal punishment and elevated neural response and threat in children. And so this actually talks about that research that I discussed, and it has all the cited sources of what that happens to the brain in regards to spanking. So if that's something that you are like, I want to see the research on that, there you go. Go pull up this article. So I'm going to go back to my other share screen. I'm sorry. Okay. And just remembering that fear is a terrible teacher, right? If we've put them in that brainstem, they're not going to learn something new. They're not going to be able to retain it. It's just not a good teacher for kids. right? Fear does not help teach them. We don't want to teach out a place of fear. And I think the other part of this for me personally, this always resonates with me, is that as my relationship with my child progresses, and we get further into this like parent-child dynamic, I want my daughter or my son, both of them, I want them to be able to have hard, difficult situations and for them to feel safe coming to me, right? Like I want to help guide them. I want to help support them, not necessarily to save them from situations, but I want them to feel safe to come to me and talk about things that are difficult. And if we're sending a message that they have to be fearful of us, then they're not going to do that. I think this is such a powerful, just kind of little memo about like, I hope my child grows up thinking I have to tell mom, she'll know what to do, rather than I'm scared to tell my mom because she's not going to understand. Right? So what kind of relationship do you want with your child? The other part of this that we're going to get into is timeouts. So the history of timeouts, timeouts were actually developed around the 1950s, as we know them, by a man named Arthur Statz. And this literally meant to have the child or force the child to endure a period of time away from the positive emotional environment, meaning that like as the child is a baby, we know that they formed like with attachments, that, they were bonding to you, you were being responsive to their cries, you were their safe place, right? Like you are the positive emotional environment for your child. They want to be near you. They feel safe when they're with you. They feel cared for. They feel loved. They feel all these amazing, amazing things. And so if they're doing something, they're engaging in a negative behavior, we are going to take ourselves away from them, right? We're going to put them in timeout. They're in the corner, they're in their room, and they have to be away from us. And they have to feel those feelings of being alone or by themselves or scared or whatever. Okay. That's literally what timeouts were developed for. The problem with this is that it puts them in their emotional brain, right? So they're not learning. They're not learning. They are in the emotional state of their brain. Timeouts tell our kids, when I'm having a hard time, I'm not desired or loved or cared for. I have to hide my big feelings so that I can be loved, to have my needs met by others, right? And so this can lead later on, and I think many of us experience this. I know I was raised with timeouts. I was raised out with timeouts and being spanked. I was raised with both of those things. That this can lead to people-pleasing tendencies. This can lead to anxiety and depression, and truly, this can also lead to having a hard time being vulnerable and honest in relationships because we're fearful of judgment from those that we love and care about, right? And so this can be not great for our kids' mental health in the long run. And the other part of this is our children don't have a developed prefrontal cortex, and they won't for a while, right? Like your prefrontal cortex in children is developing very like long term up until like their teens and early 20s. Like they don't have a fully developed prefrontal cortex. They are not reflecting in timeout. So if you like are putting them in timeout and being like, go think about what you've done, they're not doing that. They don't have the prefrontal cortex to be able to do that. And so they're really over there thinking things like, mommy's so mad at me. She must hate me, right? Like mommy doesn't like me right now. She's really mad at me. Or I'm scared. I'm locked in my room. I'm away from people. They're banging on the door. They're trying to get out. They're scared. Or like, I just wanted my toy back from my brother. I don't understand. Why am I over here? I just wanted my toy back. He took my toy. I just wanted my toy. It's my toy. Or they like him more than they like me, or they like her more than they like me. Sissy doesn't go to timeout. Why am I in timeout? And no one cares about how I feel, right? So they're not reflecting about their behavior. They're in the emotional part of their brain. Okay, so they're not learning from this punishment. Okay. Now, caveat to timeouts. And I mentioned this in my live class too. I am an advocate for, if you are in a dysregulated part of your brain, like if I, as the adult, am so frustrated that I'm in the emotional part of my brain, I'm yelling, or I'm in the physical survival state of my brain where I'm like ready to haul off and hit my kid because I'm so frustrated, I absolutely advocate for you to pick up your child, go put them in a safe place, and then for you to take your own timeout, right? Like you need a minute to get yourself regulated before interacting with your kid. But just know that that's for you. It's not really for them to learn anything. They're not going to learn anything from that. You're just diffusing the situation to keep everyone safe. There are absolutely times where I have been at the brink in my parenting experience, where I have picked up my kid, I have set them in their room with the baby gate at the door, and I have walked away from them for 5 minutes. And it wasn't to put them in timeout. It was just like, I need a minute. I'm not ready to interact right now because I'm feeling so mad and frustrated. I need a minute. But it was for me, right? I didn't think that they were learning something from sitting in timeout. It was like, nope, we both just need timeout because I just need to like regulate. So I absolutely advocate for that. That's very similar to the idea of like when your infant is crying nonstop and you can't figure out why, and you know, your pediatrician and doctors and whoever will tell you like, go put the baby in a safe place and walk away for a minute. They're safe. Just make the situation safe, and then it's okay to take a minute. Okay. So that being said, if you need that, please do that. I would rather have you do that than interact with your child when you're in an emotional or survival state. Okay. It's just not productive. So unrelated or imposed consequences. So these are kind of like we were talking about, like, I'm going to take the iPad away, or you're not going to get a treat after dinner if you don't come inside when I tell you to, whatever. These are confusing to kids. Okay. They don't, A plus B can't equal Z, right? Like it's confusing to them. They don't support the child in learning the necessary skill. And it usually results in like the blame game or the lack of ownership that we talked about there. It's an us against you situation, right? They're like, oh, mom took my iPad away because I, you know, knocked over my sister's block tower. They're like, now it's just you. You're the problem in this situation. So these are the ways that children typically respond to punishment. We get resentment. They feel like they aren't being treated as fairly, or, they start to feel like there's favoritism. Okay. Rebellion. They feel powerless, especially as they become older. They start to act out more, kind of exercising that power. They want to get revenge, right? So they're like, I'm going to get even, if they feel like they've been treated unfairly. And they can also retreat. So this is where they start to pull away from you, okay? Or they retreat from those relationships because they don't feel like they're as nurturing. And these things can get more extreme as they get older. So again, when we talked about like when your children are teenagers, this stuff's going to get scarier and bigger, right? Like the rebellion gets bigger when they're teenagers. If they feel like they have to act out, or that revenge, or they're retreating away from you and isolating themselves away from you. And so these are the things we want to move away from, right? We want to focus on consequences and not punishments. So that way we're not having as much of this happen. And I love this quote. Dr. Becky Kennedy, many of you may have heard of her. She has a really great book called Good Inside. If you're interested in reading her parenting book, she's great. Follow her Instagram. I think she has like a parenting workshop or group or something too. You can't punish a child into managing tough feelings, making good decisions, caring about others, or learning how to be in a healthy relationship. You can't punish them into those things. Okay. And actually, punishment gets in the way of all this critical development. After all, punishments make kids feel bad inside, which leads to self-blame, dysregulation, and the belief that loving relationships involve power dynamics, fear, aloneness, and control. They are not effective in the short or long term. I think it's such a powerful quote. Oh my goodness. Okay. So again, these punishments rely on judgment, right? I'm deeming the behavior as bad, and so I'm going to punish you for it. Consequences rely on reflection. Okay. So a very simple example of this, like very simplified. Let's say my child colors on the wall. All right. I am deeming coloring on the wall bad. Now, is coloring on the wall bad? Okay. I think a lot of us would be like, yeah, but technically coloring on the wall is neutral. There could be another family somewhere where coloring on the wall is totally fine. Right? Like maybe they have an art wall and they let their children color all over the wall. Like coloring on the wall itself is not bad. It just is. And so it's relying on my judgment of what I think or what society says, like coloring on the walls is bad, right? And so I'm going to punish you. You're in trouble because you punished on the wall, rather than consequences relying directly into what has happened. Oh, I noticed there's crayon all over the wall. It's very, very messy. It could damage the wall. Instead of me just saying it's bad to color on the wall, I'm now talking about what has actually happened to the wall, right? What do we need to do to solve this problem? Well, we need to clean it up, right? Like we need to go get a rag or a magic eraser. We need to wipe down the wall and clean it, right? So the consequence there is actually cleaning the wall rather than like them going to time out. Does that make sense? So then we're kind of going to get into that. So punishments and rewards. Punishments and rewards are extrinsic. These are children like getting like an M&M for doing a good job or timeout. Oh, my internet's unstable. Now. Okay, I'm hoping the internet's better now. So those punishments and rewards that are extrinsic, they do not help our children long term, right? Those effects are very, very short term. Eventually, they're not going to care about the M&M, and those rewards are going to have to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger for them to care. Consequences focus on intrinsic motivation. So that way, even when there isn't a punishment or a reward taking place, they're still doing the right thing. Okay. Punishment might strengthen your power, but it's going to weaken your influence. I love that quote too. Okay. When we want to teach our children that their emotions that they're having in a situation are valid, but that their behavior can and will have consequences. It's okay to be mad. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to be happy. It's okay to be excited. How we present these emotions is what we want to teach our children to work on productively, right? Like I'm allowed to be mad about something, but I may not just go like kick in a door, right? I'm allowed to be mad. I can have that emotion. That experience is valid. Going and beating the crap out of a door, not okay. Okay, so we have to talk about how to handle our emotions effectively, what kinds of things we can do to be productive in presenting those emotions. And remember that parenting is actually 80% connection and guidance. I'm sorry, 80% connection, 20% guidance, because right? So like think about a teacher that like if you felt connected to that teacher, the lessons that they were teaching you were so much more important because you felt like they cared about you. But if you had a teacher that you felt like didn't care about you, you probably remember like a fraction of what they said. That their lessons had no meaning to you. And so we want to connect with our children first. I encourage you to use like a time in or be the safe space for your kid, especially in these younger years. It's way easier to like be that, to physically be the safe space for your kids. And if you want to learn more about like being the safe space for your kids, we can go back and watch the topic, the workshop on love. There's some stuff in that one. But in general, if your kid is in a dysregulated state and we know they're cut off from learning because they're in that brainstem or that emotional state, then just focus on providing safety and connection, right? So like when my kid is dysregulated and she's got like these big tantrums and feelings, I will literally just scoop her up. I will take her, I say my daughter because she usually has some of the bigger of the emotions. But I scoop her up and I take her into her room, and I don't leave her in her room on her own. I sit with her. I literally will sit on the ground with her or sit on the ground next to her, and I will just model that deep breathing. Or I'll just be like, I hear you. You're really mad. You're really, really frustrated right now. I understand. And I just practice being the safe space. And she learns to regulate too. We practice the deep breathing, we practice calming down. We might take a minute to read a book until we're regulated. And then we start to work through the problem solving piece. Okay. And I think we all struggle with this because this is something that, especially when we're out in public and stuff, we don't want the judgment. But controlling your child's behavior is not indicative of good parenting. And you can't honestly do it. right? Like your child is going to fly off the handle sometimes. I think we've all experienced that. I think we've all been in places where we've been in public and we're like, oh my gosh, my kid is like off the walls right now. And like, I can't get them under control. And like, you can't control someone else. You can't. Um, Regulating your behavior despite what your child is doing is actually indicative of good parenting. Okay. Like you are only in charge of you. You can only control what you are doing. And so understanding that piece first, and then being able to see your intention of what you're going for and working productively towards that. Okay. This is something that's super helpful to me, especially when I'm trying to regulate myself and my kiddos are escalated. Remember that the behavior is not happening to you. It's happening in front of you. Like often I will have to say to myself, like, whew, I'm like start to get my anxiety up. My kids are being high energy or they're crazy or they're having a meltdown or they're screaming and tantruming, and your own internal survival state or emotional state starts to go off, right? Like you feel yourself getting anxious, you feel yourself getting ready to scream or yell or whatever. And the best thing that you can do in that moment is just tell yourself, I'm safe. This is not an emergency, right? Like, I'm safe. This is not an emergency. My child is having a hard time. Okay. Okay. So going back to these consequences, conscious discipline focuses on what we call natural and logical consequences. Okay. And consequences are always occurring. These things are always happening, whether we like it or not, half the time. And in order for them to be effective, for our children to learn from them, they have to be in their frontal cortex, right? They have to be in that prefrontal cortex. They have to be connected to you. Okay. They have to feel like you care, like they can actually intake this information. And they have to be conscious of what choice they played in this, or what choice we played in this. They have to be motivated by that internal state. And these things have to be able to be reflected upon, and choice has to be made apparent so they can understand how they can change the outcome next time. Okay. This is how we get consequences. This is how we get effective consequences. All right. So a natural consequence is something that takes place without you having to do anything. Okay. There's often a misunderstanding with this one. You don't have to do anything for a natural consequence to take place. So I give the definition of like, if a child spills the milk, oftentimes people will tell me like the natural consequence of that is they have to clean it up. Not true. The natural consequence is the milk is spilled. The floor is wet. There's no milk in the cup. Those are the natural consequences. They just happen. Okay. When we're working with young children, especially littles, these are the types of consequences that we want to focus on. Okay. Helping them understand, because this helps them understand how their world, how one thing happens and then the next thing happens. It's cause and effect, right? If I dump the milk out, the milk is gone. I have no milk. That's the natural consequence. If I color on the wall is messy. If I throw a ball at the TV or the glass window, the glass is broken, right? The natural consequences already happened. Now, the logical consequences is what comes into play as to like how we solve these things, right? If I dump the milk out, maybe I have to mop it up or help clean it up. Maybe the logical consequence is like, I don't get more milk until next time, until the next time I sit down for a meal. Maybe I have to drink something else, or maybe I don't have something to drink because I've dumped it all out. Who knows? This is the same thing with like a toddler or a baby who's throwing food off their high chair, right? Like you wouldn't just continue to let them throw food off their high chair forever and ever and ever. You would say, I see you're done. So we're going to get down. Like you're all done eating. I notice you're throwing, so that tells me you're done. I'm getting you out of your high chair. We're all done for this for right now. We'll try again in 20 minutes, an hour, whatever. Make it developmentally appropriate, but you're still putting in that consequence. Maybe if they break the window, they have to help pay for it. They have to do chores around to help pay for the cost of the window. Maybe if the child is having a hard time leaving a park, then the logical consequence is like, then I'm going to pick you up and carry you. I'll give an example of this one that it was very effective, even in my own parenting experience. My daughter last spring, we went to a park last summer, I don't know, sometime last year. We went to a park, and actually Oglesby Park, if you've ever been to Oglesby Park. And if you've been there, you know that the parking lot is like on the top of the hill. And then there's like this huge winding path all the way down and like snakes back and forth all the way down to the playground. It's like a really far walk down to this playground that winds around this trail. And we went there, we were having fun, whatever. It was time to leave. And I said, come on, it's time to go. She cried and cried and cried, did not want to leave the park, was like really upset with me. I'm holding my then like newly 2-year-old, like just 2-year-old on my hip. I carry him out to the car. She does follow me, but she's crying and screaming the whole way to the car. I get him buckled into his car seat, and I turn around to put her in her car seat, and she takes off all the way down this hill to go back down to this slide or whatever that she wanted to do. And I had to chase her to go get her. So I was so angry. I unbuckled my 2-year-old from his car seat. I had to chase her all the way back down this hill. And then I had to carry her kicking and screaming all the way back up this hill with my 2-year-old trying to like drag him along and toddle him back up this hill. Right. And I get her put in the car seat and get her buckled in, get him buckled in, and we leave. And when we left, once she was calm, now I didn't do any of this while she was kicking and screaming and crying. I got her in the seat, got her buckled, we went home, it got calm. And I told her, I said, you had a hard time leaving that park because of the way that that park is set up, I cannot chase you down this hill with your little brother in tow. It's not sustainable for me. It's too hard. So until I can trust that you can leave parks when it's time for us to go without running away, we will not be going back to that park. That was the consequence. That was the logical consequence. It was a boundary I was holding. We will not go back to that park again until I trust that you can responsibly leave the park when it is time to leave. And man, does she know it, because every time we're at a park now, and I say, okay, it's time to go. You pick your last thing to do. It's time to go. And she starts to whine or cry. I say, hey, remember what happens if you choose not to leave when it's time to leave. And she will immediately now tell me that we don't get to come back to this park anymore, like Oglesby Park. Like she knows, she knows. And we have not been back there. We have not been back there. Now she's been so good about leaving now because she remembers that the consequence is directly related to how her behavior was when we left, that she leaves the park without a fight. I would say 98% of the time now. Like truly, all I have to say is remember what happens if you don't leave when it's time to go. And she knows like that consequence was very, very effective for her. And we have not been back. I have stood by my word on that. Now, that being said, she's at a point now where I feel like I can trust her to leave when it's time to leave. That trust has been rebuilt. I can see that she's learning the skill of, yes, I get to pick one more thing to do, and then it's time to leave. Even though she's not always happy about it, there are times where she cries about it or she's upset, but she does come with me. That I would be willing to try that again. We just haven't at this point, but she knows. So that is an example of how the logical consequence was enforced in that situation. And it made perfect sense to her brain as to what that meant. Okay. So we're going to watch this if it starts.
This is what most people get wrong when they try to apply consequences with their children. One, consequences need to be respectful, related, and reasonable. Related means it needs to be related to the actual thing that's happening. Respectful means it needs to be confident, assertive communication, not passive or aggressive. And reasonable. The time has to fit the crime. The other thing that most adults get wrong is that they think that children aren't supposed to have big feelings and reactions to their consequences. And because we think that we get triggered when they do, instead of expecting it, because it really is a part of the process, which makes it harder for us to give children what they really need in these moments, which is empathy. Instead, we have a tendency to just judge them and say things like, this is your fault. You are being bad. Will raise defensiveness and shut them off to any kind of learning that they could get from this moment. It's more helpful to say things like, you were wanting the toy. You were hoping to have a turn sooner. It's hard. I'm here for you. And when the intensity of the emotion starts to decrease, then you talk to them about consequences motivate children to learn new skills. Logical consequences motivate children to use the skills that they already have. And punishments just punish children for not having the skills to meet our expectations yet.
Okay. If you are a social media user, I highly recommend following Mr. Chaz. He is actually a certified conscious discipline instructor. He's awesome. He's so great. He does a lot of their talks at their conventions. He goes to schools and does talks. He's really, really awesome. So if you want to challenge your thinking about how you're parenting, he is a great, great follow. So another example I want to give of this, is that, you know, he talks about how part of our issue is that we expect to be able to implement the consequence, and then that like our kids aren't going to have a reaction to it. They're just going to be like magically reflective in that moment. And they're going to be like, oh, I understand how my yucky choice made that happen, and I will never do it again. And I'm so glad I learned this lesson, mommy and daddy. Right? Like they're not going to happen. They're going to be upset about it. Please make sure your expectations are in check. Okay. They are allowed to be upset and feel the heaviness of their choices, right? Like they're not going to be like thanking you for teaching them this wonderful lesson. It's hard. It's hard to learn new things, guys. It's hard to learn and feel those consequences. Like we know when we've had to feel our consequences of our actions, like it's sometimes hard to sit with that. Okay. Sometimes we have consequences and we're like, ooh, you know, like maybe you stayed out too late the night before partying and you go into work the next morning and you feel yucky. Like that doesn't feel good. You're feeling the consequences of your actions. It doesn't feel good. You're probably irritated that day. You're probably exhausted. You're probably snippy with people, right? Like don't expect your child to just have like this super positive outlook about being taught a lesson, right? Let me give you an example of this. So I noticed recently with the cold weather this past winter, we had gotten very lax with my child with like screen time. And so we typically watch like an episode of Bluey or something before bed. And she had gotten into this phase of like, you know, the winters were longer and the nights wasn't as much to do because it was cold and we didn't want to be outside. And so we were watching more than one episode. You know, she would be like, oh, can I watch 2 or 3? Or can I watch this episode and then this episode or whatever? And like, so the screen time had just gotten out of control. And we noticed that bedtimes were dragging on, the whining was upticking. And typically when I notice these kinds of behaviors in my kid, I know what it means is actually it's a reflection on my parenting and that she can no longer trust me at my word, right? Because if she's starting to whine to get more of what she wants, then usually what it means is that she feels like there's room for that, right? Because I haven't been holding boundaries consistently. And so we had an instance, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago where I was like, whew, we got to get back on track. This is getting real rough. Like I can tell her behavior is starting to escalate. She's getting real whiny. She's getting real like defiant and frustrated about things. And it's just, you know, bedtime's getting drug out so long. And so I told her and I said, hey, we're going to watch our episode of Bluey tonight. If you get off the couch and start playing and you're not watching it, we're not watching another one. So if you get off the couch, it tells me you're done and it's time for bed. I'm letting you know that before we start. And so I implemented the boundary, right? Set the boundary. As long as you're sitting there, we will watch the episode, but then it's going to be time for bed. We're only watching one. So what happens? Well, she got off the couch about 2-3 minutes into this episode and I didn't say a word. I got up, I turned off the TV and I called to them and I said, okay, it's time to go to bed. Let's go. And I started walking down the hall. Her brother started happily following me. He didn't care. And she lost it. lost it, right? Like now I know because my expectations were in check. I wasn't expecting her to be happy about me holding this boundary. I knew this meltdown was going to happen. But I also knew that I needed to tighten up my boundaries and that I needed to be very safe and secure in that, holding that boundary. And I just said, I get it. You're really mad. You wanted to watch another episode. You chose to get off the couch. I told you we were going to watch one. And if you got off the couch, it told me you were done, and we're done. So we're done. We're going to bed. She was mad. She stomped in the hallway. She was scream crying. I go into her room. I kind of give her a minute to just kind of like have the meltdown, to be upset about it, have a moment to feel her feelings. And her brother moves into the bathroom. We're brushing his teeth. And I come back out and she's still stomping and screaming in the hallway. And my dear husband is looking at me like, man, just let her watch the rest of the episode. And I was like, nope, we're holding the boundary. We're holding the boundary. She needs to be able to trust us at our word. That's part of the problem here, is that we've gotten lax and we've let some of these boundaries go. I said, she needs to be able to trust us. We're not going to watch it. And she's allowed to be upset about it, but we're not doing it. And so then I stood in the doorway of the bedroom and I said to her, okay, I see you're having a hard time coming into the room. It's time for bed now. I get that you're really frustrated about it, but it is time for bed. Here's the situation we have right now. You can either walk in here and brush your teeth and we can still have time for a book. But if I have to fight with you, or if we have to sit here and argue, or I have to try to convince you to come into your room, or if I have to come pick you up and carry you into your room and to help you brush your teeth and all of these things, then we are wasting time and we will no longer have time for a book. And then it will just be time for bed, right? Like this, now we're drawing this out. And so if I have to come pick you up and carry you into this room to do our bedtime routine, then we will no longer have time for a book. If you walk in now and you start doing these things, we will still have time for that bedtime book. So I know you missed out on the Bluey. Don't miss out on your book. And so she did. She was mad about it. She still cried about it, but she did walk into the room. She did brush her teeth. She did get in bed. She did get to choose her book. She read her book, but because she knew at that point I was holding boundaries, right? And I wasn't angry about it. I wasn't aggressive about it. I was just very, very firm, very calm, very loving, but very boundaried. Okay. And so she understood how, if this consequence meant this was going to take place, then moving forward, that's what that looked like. And so then the next night, I'm telling you, I sat them down on the couch and I was like, okay, here's our one Bluey. If you get off the couch, what's going to happen? And she did not move. She sat there. She watched her whole episode. So she felt like she got it. And then we went to bed and it was fine. But your kids have to be able to trust you at your word. Okay. And the boundaries have to be calm and secure and loving and firm. Okay. You can't be wishy-washy and you've got to stick to them. You've got, if you're going to implement that consequence of like, I'm going to turn it off or whatever that is, whatever that related consequence is, you've got to stick to it. Okay. Not in a mean way, just in like a firm way. Okay. So when they have situations, they have to understand how can they make it right, right? So if they break a block tower or if they destroy brother's work or sister's work, how are they going to solve that problem? I'm not typically, you can go back and watch some of our other workshops, but I don't typically advocate for forcing apologies. I do advocate for modeling them, but I really like the how can I make it right? Sometimes the victim doesn't want an apology. Sometimes they want help solving it, right? So how can I fix it? What can I do now? What should I do next time? Right. So like my daughter learned from both of those experiences, the park experience and the TV experience, what she should do next time to be able to have the opportunity. Right. She knew how her behavior had to change in order to get what she wanted. All right. So problem solving. When we look at problem solving, especially as kids get older and they have a little bit more of like a developed prefrontal cortex where they can have some more critical thinking and reasoning skills, helping them learn to problem solve. So I always encourage, like, as you have some of these like older preschoolers or early elementary kids, how can you teach them to problem solve? And so helping them identify what is the problem here? How do we know it's a problem? What's the proposed solution? What does it look like? How will it take place? When will it take place? How do we know if it's working? How will we know if it's not working? What will we do if it's not working? What will we do if it is working? Okay, so an example I like to use with this one is like, let's say your kiddo is struggling with like brushing their teeth, right? Like they don't want to brush their teeth. It's a fight every night. So what's the problem? Brushing teeth, right? Like you're not brushing your teeth. How do we know it's a problem? Their breath is stinky, or maybe they have a cavity. Who knows? So, right, like we're talking about how do we know this thing is a problem? What's the proposed solution? Well, the proposed solution would be, we brush our teeth at 8 p.m. every night, right before bed. We're helping them come up with this, right? Maybe they want to brush their teeth right after dinner. I don't know, whatever they think the solution is to that. What will it look like? How will it take place? Actually map out the plan. How will we know if it's working? Well, in theory, you'll be brushing your teeth regularly. You won't have any more cavities, whatever. How do we know if it's not working? Well, you're not sticking to your plan. You haven't brushed your teeth. Maybe you are getting more cavities, that kind of a thing. What will we do if it's working? Well, if it's working, you can stick to your plan of when you think it's an appropriate time to brush your teeth, whether it's after dinner or before bed or whatever. And if it's not working, well, then mom has to decide, and mom will have to stand with you in the bathroom to make sure. You'll have to have a timer. You won't be able to have bedtime book until your teeth are brushed. Those kinds of things. So like make sure the consequences are fitting into the problem. Okay. So think about common scenarios that you're having with your kids, and brainstorm. What are the natural consequences of those behaviors? What are the logical consequences of those behaviors? And what are some ways you can problem solve those behaviors? So think about some common ones that you're encountering. Here's some example situations. Maybe your kiddo is running into a parking lot. They don't seem to have a healthy awareness of cars or danger in those situations. So what does brainstorming the consequences of that look like? Well, now I understand that you're having a hard time being safe in the parking lot. You will either need to take my hand a second you get out of the car, or you will have to go straight from the car seat to the shopping cart. Like I won't be able to put you down. That's the consequence. Okay. Maybe the child is hitting. Maybe the situation in that is like the logical scenario when they're in that fight or flight and they're hitting is like, I'm going to have to hold your hands. I will not allow you to hit. That's the boundary I'm going to hold. Or I'm going to move my body away from you. Or I will have to move you away from your brother or sister, and you'll have to play by yourself until your body is calm and ready to play safely again. Okay. Splashing water out of the tub. Well, then it's time to get out of the tub. You might have to clean up the water. Maybe we can't do tubs full of lots of water to play and splash in anymore because you're splashing so much water out of the tub. Maybe we'll have to put a little bit of water in the tub. So just brainstorm some of these situations and think about what you're coming up against, and think about what those consequences are and how they're directly relating. Okay. Remember that discipline is helping a child solve the problem. Punishment makes children suffer for having a problem, and to raise problem solvers, we have to focus on solutions and not retribution. Okay? Remember, this is about progress, not perfection. Pick one thing you want to focus on. Maybe you want to focus on just regulating yourself. Maybe you want to focus on focusing on what your own intention is in the moment. Trying to focus on taking deep breaths and not focusing on like the punishment, but trying to focus on the teaching aspect. Maybe you want to focus on logical consequences. I don't know. Totally up to you. But thank you so much for being here. If you are interested, you can scan this. This will take you to a Google folder that has all of my resources in it. It has all my recorded trainings in it, some handouts, some blogs, some links to different books or websites, conscious discipline blogs and things. So all of that's in here. And then remember that you don't need to let yourself become so concerned with raising a good kid that you forget that you already have one. You already have a good kid. You have an amazing kid. So thank you everyone so much for being here tonight. And I'll see you next time.